for the very informative presentation. It's interesting to see from the responses of the global survey some priority areas selected by the Asian participants. And actually, in open forum that is coming in an hour, we will do the polls live, and so every one of you will have a chance to vote and further discuss the visions, the principles, and the thematic considerations, etc. So please stay with us. Now let's move to our next agenda item, which is the panel discussion. The topic of the panel is safeguarding and revitalizing indigenous languages in Asia for sustainable development. I'd like to introduce the moderator for the panel, Ms. Beatrice Colden, head of UNESCO Dhaka office and UNESCO representative to Bangladesh. Ms. Colden is in charge of the UNESCO mandate in Bangladesh covering education, science, culture, communication, information. And now I'll leave the floor to Beatrice to introduce the panelists and moderate the session.
Thank you, Yufan. Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. We are now having this session under the theme Preserving and Revitalizing Indigenous Languages in Asia for Sustainable Development. We have 60 minutes, so also particularly for the speakers, but also for the participants in the chat groups, we have a sort of time limitation, but the chat group, I can pick up on some questions later on, but you can also, of course, happily discuss on the chat group. I'm sort of would like to just make a few introductory words. It's sometimes perhaps a little bit repetitive what was said before, but just to sort of a little bit ease us into this session. So languages are not only tools for communication, education, social integration and development, but also live repositories that hold the unique identities, cultures, histories, traditions, and memory of our people and societies. There are over 7,000 languages spoken worldwide, among which 2,680 languages, and that makes about 40%, are in danger. Many of them are spoken by indigenous people and only used in indigenous communities. The speakers of those languages are closely tied to their territories, and this tie between the human beings, the lands where they live, and the languages they speak traces back before the creation of modern states. Nowadays, there are over 370 million indigenous people from over 90 countries in the world. These languages and culture capture the richness and diversity of human civilization. Linguistic diversity, and I think this word has been mentioned today already several times, linguistic diversity is an integral part of cultural diversity, which is at the heart of UNESCO's work. UNESCO has been promoting linguistic and cultural diversity as a key factor for peace and sustainable development since its creation. We have been publishing and updating the Atlas of World's Languages in Danger, which many of you will know, since 1996. And UNESCO advocates for mother tongue-based multilingual education with the proclamation of 21st February as International Mother Language Day. Now, in the International Year of Indigenous Languages in 2019, UNESCO, in collaboration with many stakeholders worldwide, implemented over 80 activities to revitalize and promote indigenous languages worldwide. In the coming international decade, and we know this is from 2022 to 2032, joint actions from all stakeholders, and that includes us here today, to promote, preserve, and revitalize indigenous languages will be key for the survival of indigenous languages, or the decision of indigenous people about their languages. Today, we have with us 4 speakers from different subregions of Asia who will bring different perspectives on the priorities for preserving and revitalizing indigenous languages in Asia. And allow me to introduce our 4 esteemed speakers. So we have Mr. Yudo Giri Sukayo, chairman of PANDI, which is the Indonesian Internet Domain Name Registry. He is a board member of the Asia Pacific Top Level Domain Association, and also professor at the Faculty of Computer Science at Universitas Indonesia. He has a doctorate degree in computer science from the School of Computing, Curtin University of Technology of Australia. So I think we have a very interesting sort of amalgamation within you as a person. Then we have Ms. Indu Chaudhary Taro, the representative of indigenous people organizations from Nepal in the Global Task Force for IDIL. Ms. Indu Chaudhary Taro is a representative of indigenous people organizations from Nepal in the Global Task Force for the Decade, as I said. She is also a researcher and a writer working on the issue of marginalized people's activism and social movements. And currently, she's a student of Masters of Arts in Inter-Asia NGO Studies at the Sung Kyo University. So welcome, Indu. Then we have Mr. Masahiro Yamada. He's an associate professor at the National Institute for Japanese Language and Linguistics. He received his PhD in linguistics from the University of Delaware in 2010. And since that time, he has been working on description, documentation, and revitalization of Ryukyuan languages in Yonaguni and Okinawa Islands in Japan. He leads a language revitalization project and collaborates with other linguists, artists, designers, local government, and the language community members. So also a very exciting background we have here. Then we have as our fourth person, Suvilai Premserat. She is the founding director of the Resource Center for Documentation, Revitalization, and Maintenance of Endangered Languages and Cultures at the Research Institute for Languages and Cultures of Asia at Mahidol University, Thailand. She has researched ethnic minority languages in Thailand and its neighbors since 1975. Her major publications include a 5-volume dictionary and thesaurus of the Khmu language in Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and China, and ethnolinguistic maps of Thailand. Under her direction, Mahidol University staff have facilitated language revitalization and education programs in 29 minority languages. Since 2006, she has directed the Patani Malay Thai B multilingual education project in Thailand's Deep South, where there is the border to Malaysia, which received UNESCO's 2016 King Sejong Literary Prize 2016. So also a very rich background. So we are so honored to have Madame Suvilai Premserat with us also. So let me immediately move on. And we have prepared one general question, which I would like to all 4 of you. Let me ask Madame Suvilai Premserat to answer first. And the question is, what are the most important priorities for preserving and revitalizing indigenous languages in Asia? So I would appreciate if you can answer in perhaps 2 to 3 minutes, which is difficult, but I would appreciate it. So the floor is yours, Madame Suvilai Premserat.
Oh, thank you very much. Can you hear me, right?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. For your question about the priority, for the priority for working with indigenous group on the language revitalization, I think there are 5 kinds of supports that are very important and contribute to the success of the preservation and revitalization of indigenous languages. One is the community support. That is, the community must be motivated and actively participated in the program. And number 2 is the academic or technical support. That is, the indigenous language speaker or community need to work with linguists and other specialized academics to undertake the technical work, such as the preliminary research on linguistic analysis or the baseline research on language situation survey, or working on the orthography development, something like this. So they really need the technical support. And the third thing is the financial support. They need some help, some financial support from international or national support in order to carry out the revitalization program. The fourth one is psychological support. The community needs psychological support from within and outside the community. The last one is the the policy support. Because we work on the indigenous minority groups, it's very important that it has to be accepted by the government. The support from the national language policy and education policy, national language policy and education policy must be supportive to the indigenous language, to use of the indigenous language alongside with the national language or international languages. And the last thing that I should mention is that the wider society needs to be aware or understand the tangible benefit of preserving the small languages. They not understand the cognitive value of the language and the local wisdom associated with the minority languages opportunity, so that this thing can be realized and be achieved and success. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Subilai Premjirat. Can I pass on the same question to Indu Chowdhury? The floor is yours, Indu.
Yeah, thank you for the question. In my opinion, in order to maintain indigenous language in the mainstream, I think it needs collective efforts of all indigenous people coming from all around. And apart from that, the social movements activists can coordinate and collaborate with different stakeholders. And as we know, we have more than 7,000 languages, but this is also a fact that all these languages are not legally recognized by the nations and the government. So until and unless there is legal recognition of these languages, we cannot preserve indigenous languages. And many speakers have already said there are huge number of native speakers, but they don't understand the dominant language. So it is very important that the government should implement those indigenous languages as official language, and also in the schools where the indigenous people live. So the government must understand that the indigenous languages and their culture is not just their identity, not identity of particular indigenous group, but it's also the nation's identity. And I have seen in many cases only indigenous languages and their attires are presented in the forefront of any nation's program. So more importance is given to their dance and their attire, but not to the languages. So it's important that we create pressure on the government so that the government invest more on indigenous languages. And yeah, we know social movement activists. As a social movement activist, we have organized many rallies and even the road blockades to fulfill our demands. But now we are in a new era of using new technologies. So it's important, and as a social movement, we can use those new technologies to preserve our languages. We have many websites, internet, and I really want to add one thing is everyone uses mobiles nowadays. So why don't we use mobile ringtones of indigenous languages or indigenous music, so that it will be kind of preserving our indigenous language. And why we are not creating indigenous dictionary? Maybe we can collect the words of greeting words of 7,000 indigenous languages and try to learn it and use it on our different programs. So this will generate the interest of indigenous people to learn our own indigenous language as well as others, and not only indigenous people, but also the mainstream children or mainstream people can also learn these languages. And we know the language is so powerful. Even the sign language is so powerful. We can see the example from Myanmar, like 3-finger salute displayed by pro-democracy activists in Myanmar as a symbol of resistance. So why don't we use such kind of, we can create new kind of our own some symbolic languages also to use within all the indigenous people. And lastly, I would like to say it's very important to create favorable political atmosphere, because we know politics is everything that decides, that is the decision maker. So indigenous, I think indigenous languages are declining not because our parents or the old generations are not passing the languages to new generations, but it is because of anti-indigenous government, anti-indigenous policies. So all indigenous activists, we should create such kind of pressure so that we can create new political scenario that favors indigenous people and indigenous languages. As we know, government is a guardian of all people, so it should be inclusive and treat all of us equally. That should not be discriminative. And government actors must understand that the idea of people's right to communicate in their own languages, to get education in their own languages, and to get government services in their own languages. And they should understand that this is a part of real development and real inclusive democracy. So all indigenous people should come together and then show their solidarity, not for only their own nation, but for indigenous people coming from other nations as well. Thank you.
Okay, Indu, thank you very much. You gave a great crosscut on the very important ideas. Can I put the same question to Mr. Masihori Yamada? Could you answer, and also please try to be short, perhaps 2, 3, 4 minutes?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Floor is yours.
So, in my opinion, I believe the priority is to raise the awareness of the ownership of the problem for everyone. So, so for example, so it's true that us, like the majority of the country, is killing the local languages, for instance, in Japan. But so we have responsibility. We have the responsibility of the problem. Like we need to politically do some things for those local languages, indigenous languages. But also there are issues that the local language community members, they also need to take the responsibility or take the ownership of the problem. So they are the ones who succeed the language. We support them, but they are the part, like individuals who actually transmit the languages. So it's really hard to, prioritize language revitalization in their lives, but there are some things that we can do and we should do. So that's my short answer to the question.
Okay, so thank you very much. That was very specific and obviously experience that you face, particularly in Japan, it seems. It could probably be transferable to a number of other countries, but still it sounds also very specific. And it's sort of interesting to see, since this difference between earlier, I think it was said that it needs sort of a variety of enabling environment so that the transmission can take place, since there's a willingness of transmission taking place, but you're saying there needs to be sort of more commitment. So that is interesting to see this diverse sort of elements and aspects. So let me now pass the same question and perhaps repeat it for the audience again. So what are the most important priorities for preserving and revitalizing indigenous languages in Asia? To Professor Yudo Giri-Sukayo. So can I ask you, please answer also in 3-4 minutes? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beatrice. It's been an honor to be invited in this forum. So I would like to say thank you to UNESCO Indonesia, especially Dr. Ming Kwok Lim for giving this opportunity. So how to preserve the indigenous language? What PANDI did or is doing right now is actually we go with the technology. As Indo mentioned that in the digital era, now we cannot avoid for using the digital technology. So one way to preserve the indigenous language is actually to present it digitally by doing digitization and also digitalization. So if we want to preserve, then actually we need current speakers and we need future speakers. So one way to do it is actually when we bring the technology here to digitize the indigenous language, then let's make it easy for them to use and to learn the language. So by providing a keyboard, by providing automatic translation, by providing automatic transliteration, or by providing digital dictionary, all those kind of digital technology we can use to preserve the indigenous language. So by doing that, then we can increase the content of those indigenous language on the web, so it can be read, it can be used anywhere and anytime by current speakers and also future speakers. Agree with Professor Suwilai that government also has an important role here to embrace the use of the indigenous language. As an example, by encouraging local governments to put the indigenous language in the curriculum in the school, so then we can maintain the future speakers. And also agree with Indo that technology has an important role here. And we also agree that with Yamada-san that you cannot do this alone. So we have traveled thousands of kilometers in Indonesia. As you know that Indonesia has 718 indigenous languages, where actually only 7 of them has been coded under the Unicode. So in this digitalization and digitization program, we have big challenges that we need to have a good melting pot between the linguists and also the IT activists. Of course, to maintain the indigenous language, you need to master the language. But those who master the language do not yet have qualified skills to master an IT. While IT activists, as an example, I'm also an IT activist, not many IT activists have given attention to the development of indigenous language on digital platforms. So this is where PANDI comes in as the .id registry, the one who maintains .id, internet domain name in Indonesia. In Japan, they have .gp. In India, they have .in. In Indonesia, we have .id. So, and as mentioned by Professor Suwilai and also Yamada-san, that community, the local community has a big role here. So even in our program for the digitization and digitalization, we don't have any intention to claim it as our own program, because in this program, we need to do it together. And following the Chinese proverb, if you want to walk fast, then you can go alone. But if you want to go far, then you need to go together. So this is why PANDI created this melting pot, and together with the indigenous language activists across Indonesia, together with academics, together with the government, IT activists, and also UNESCO in this case, we have this, we call it MIMDAN. So if we translate it in English, it is actually digitalizations of Indonesian scripts. And we have a long journey to present the indigenous language digitally, because in the digital era, if you do not present in digitally, then actually you are not access. So if you want to access, then you need to do digitization and also digitalization. Thank you. Back to Beatrice.
Thank you so much. So I'm allowed to ask a few more questions to you. And I think, Yuto, I will stay with you because you were very specific on this digital aspect of an online aspect of things. So I would like to ask a few more questions in this context. So what for you are the biggest challenges you have met to promote indigenous languages on the digital platforms? You alluded already a little bit to it, but perhaps you can very specifically, because I think for the audience, it will also be interesting to hear that experience that you, that you have already gained, and could share some of these challenges that you could detect in sort of digital platforms and putting things digital.
Okay, so it's all started last year when actually we had a plan to apply for what we call internationalized domain name. As you know that ICANN, as the one who manages the internet in this world, actually they have programmed what they call internationalized domain name. So we thought that by having a domain name for indigenous language, then we want to preserve the indigenous language script in Indonesia. But then that application was rejected by ICANN. So, but that gave us a good lesson for us, because ICANN said that the usage of the indigenous language, in this case, Japanese language, is actually still limited. So although it is already digitally coded under the Unicode, but the usage of those scripts are actually still under the limited use script. And also, as mentioned by Indu, although that Indonesian language is actually recognized as the language for unity in Indonesia, but we also have mother language, but that's legal identity. It is actually still not embraced by several regions in Indonesia. So far, only 2 of provinces in Indonesia who actually give legal status for their indigenous language, and they also promote the usage of indigenous language in many fields. So one challenge is to get more support. I don't say that my government has no support. They have supported nationally, but the development of the indigenous language is actually our government gave it to the local government. So we need to approach the local government to also embrace the indigenous language, to give the legal status of the language. When we say legal, it is the consequence of the legal status here is also mentioned to, so that the language need to also be mentioned under ISO 3166 -- so in this case, we also need to speak with the National Standardization Agency. And you know how long and how complicated to get that indigenous language standardized. So which is why I said it's a long journey, and we need to go together with other stakeholders as well. So we need to have the standardization. We need to have the strong policy from the government. We also need to speak with the linguists about which characters need to be standardized and so on. So big challenge is actually, as I mentioned before, that how to create a great melting pot that technologies, linguistic, academics, government come together, and then we work together to preserve this indigenous language. Back to Beatrice.
Okay, great, thank you. Now I'm still asking the question I have in mind. I think you have probably answered already something, but I think it's still worthwhile to specifically point it out, and that is, how can one reduce the digital gap between the speakers of indigenous or minority languages and the speakers of dominant languages?
Yeah, so when we want to reduce the digital gap, that means that it's about literacy. So in this case, how can we reduce the digital divide? among those who has been literate on those indigenous language and those who hasn't. So in this case, we need to maintain our current speakers, and also we need to get more future speakers, in this case, young generation. Now, when we talk about young generation, they cannot be separated from technology. You know how young generation right now, right? TikTok, Twitter, etc. So in this case, we need to make it easy for them to learn the indigenous language. Don't make it hard for them to learn the indigenous language. One way to use it is actually, as I mentioned before, we need to use the technology, which is why PANDI, together with other indigenous language activists across Indonesia, academics, government, IT activists, also we have a plan that in this year we want to come up with what we call keyboard. So it is a digital keyboard, and it will contain many indigenous language script. So once you have the keyboard, then you can do many things. Once it is digitized, then you can create automatic translation in the future. Once it is digitized, then you can make automatic transliteration in the future. And for that, you need to come up with what a digital dictionary as well. So for having all of this technology or all of those tools to be presented in the technology, then you need to get help from many people. In this case, the linguist activists and also the IT activists come together in that melting pot and then do it together to preserve the indigenous language. Thank you. Back to Beatrice.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that is quite really interesting and important, and links together what various of the speakers and even earlier was said, and is still also, I think, recommendations of what could and should be done. And I'm sure it has for other countries and sort of a global level, this is also, I mean, sort of applicable. So let me then move back to Dr. Masahiro Yamada. I would like to ask you a question now, going a little bit sort of away from this very sort of digital talking we had now. There are several nation states in Asia where indigenous people and the languages are marginalized. And how do you think to raise the awareness of stakeholders of the importance to preserve the under-resourced languages in these countries? Could I have your thoughts on this? It's not an easy question.
Yeah, this is a question about like general things, right?
Yeah.
So I thought about this question, and I think there are some things that we need to like divide first. So raising the awareness at least two different levels, like practical level and abstract level. So as for the practical levels, I don't think there are like the answer. This is how to raise the awareness of the stakeholders, because it depends on the cultural backgrounds a lot. And based on my experience in different islands in Ryukyu area, and also based on what I heard from like international conferences, so things don't work like, oh yeah, they are successful in Hawaii, they created the school, so let's do it in my country as well. It doesn't work that way. And some like Native American communities, they were successful in language revitalization using picture books, so let's do it here as well. But it doesn't work that way, because whether some like specific tools or specific methodology works or not depends a lot on the cultural backgrounds at different places. So at practical levels, we can't really get the idea, the answer. But so I try to get some abstract levels like practice or idea for raising the awareness of the stakeholders. So what I believe for now is that people do what they want to do, and people only do what they want to do, right? So it's very important to find what is like internal motivations for them, like for like local people, let's say, in general. So we need to find things that they like, things that they are willing to spend their resources, times, or some even monies. So once we can find those things, then we can like add like this problem, like language conservation, with those things that they like, then things automatically goes. They will do it, they will like conserve their languages because they like it, because that's what they want to do, like independent from the idea that language is important or culturally something. So that's a short answer for probably the first part. Should I? Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Yeah. Okay, well, that is still very interesting. And I think, I mean, that is indeed a very interesting point, literally, for also sustainable development projects beyond now indigenous language preservations, that you need to, you talk with communities, you talk with, with right holders, if you so will, also. And you need to understand their motivation and what they want. You cannot sort of order them, you know, sort of just from the top. So it needs to speak to them, and they have to have the ownership. I think that's probably also what is part of it. So I think that is still a very important aspect also. Now let me, it's a little bit a different question, but I still think it is also interesting. Could you talk about language documentation, and why is it important for revitalizing minority languages? I think you have there some experiences, so perhaps you could share this with us.
Okay, thank you. So documentation, I think that consists of the essential materials to understand the language as a language system. So I normally divide like description, documentation, and revitalization. They go together essentially, but what like we actually do is different. So description is more about like writing a reference grammar or building a dictionaries. So I have a background of like linguistics, theoretical linguistics. So I started working with the minority languages in Japan from this viewpoint. I wanted to write a reference grammar of some languages, and then move on to the documentation. It's about the like linguistically annotated sounds and audio or video movie files. Yeah. So what people, the speakers actually use the language, and also revitalization or understanding the language or linguistic system basis on those like description and documentation. And I like from the like Japanese point of view here. So my institution, NINJO, National Institute for Japanese Language and Linguistics, it has like one of the largest numbers of the linguist collaborators in Japan, but most of them work on like grammatical descriptions and possibly some documentations, like videotaping them to build a corpus, for example. And less people work on revitalization for some reasons, like Japanese specific reasons. So one of the reasons is that it's very hard to get publications on revitalization, because language revitalization or language conservation is not yet established as a like research in Japan, let's say. So people tend to work on like grammatical descriptions for years and years and don't really care about like language revitalization. Well, they do care, but they can't really actually put their priority on language revitalization. And also the local community members as well. It's very easy for them, for like, including myself, for us to imagine that having a dictionary, that's a great thing. That's a like record of the language. But revitalization or like documentations, revitalization, like some people need to learn the language, and some people, like some speakers, they keep using the language to their children, regardless they understand them or not. So it's very hard for them as well. So, but the documentation, I think it's important or like useful to bridge those gaps. So it's half description in the sense that it builds a corpus if it's linguistically annotated. And that also works for language revitalization as well, because it's the documentation those linguistically annotated sounds and movie files, relatively has some more space for like creativity, make them enjoyable or entertainable. So sound audio files of movies, of stories, for example, we have a project to create like picture books for children and parents based on their narrative, their local narratives as well. And that also leads to what Professor Yudon said, that we need scripts for them, like, the writing systems for them, orthographies, let's say. And we can, linguists, local people can collaborate, work on them, internally motivated, because we want those picture books. It should be fun, it will be fun. And we can do those technical or dirty works to establish orthographies because we want them. So that's how like documentation works, in half descriptive work, half revitalization works, I think. Yeah, I think that's.
Okay, great. I think that is very very interesting and sort of important findings that you put out there. Because we short on time, it would be really interesting to talk on this more. But thank you so much for this. I need to move on to our next speaker to ask some questions so that we can really benefit from all four of you. Madame Suvilai, Brancherat, I would like to move to you and would like to ask you the questions. What are the key lessons learned from the language revitalization and education programs, which you obviously conducted with a long experience for minority languages? Could you give us there your thoughts? So the key lessons learned from language revitalization and education programs.
Oh, thank you very much. I think the key lesson learned from our experience working with several indigenous language groups on the language revitalization is that the indigenous group or the community must be at the heart. Must be at the heart of the program. Must be at the, I'll say again, the community or the language speaker must be at the heart of the revitalization effort. That is, they have got to go through the revitalization process every step. And after our experience of working with the indigenous group on revitalization project, we have concluded that at least there are 11 steps that are very important for the revitalization process. It is a community-based language revitalization and maintenance process. It is called Mahidol model. The first thing is on the language preliminary research, like language situation survey or the language vitality, and then the mobilizing partner. And the third thing is on the developing the writing system. This is very important because the first thing that when we work with the community, the first thing that they would like to do is to work on the writing system of their language, because most of them do not have the written language before. And too many people, they think that to be a real language is something that must be able to write, to be written. So developing a writing system is the first thing that we do, and people really enjoy working on that. And after they have the writing system, they can go on working on the literature production, stories, things like that. So a writer's workshop can be organized for them. And after that, they can choose whether they would like to go on the school-based language revitalization, where they can have the mother tongue education, or they can work on the local knowledge or local wisdom, or work on the dictionary, work on the ethnobotany, and many other things. So, and also for those outside the school, they prefer to work on the community learning center, where they can, it is like a community learning center or local museum or the learning class outside. Apart from this, we have organized a group of facilitators to facilitate the project, the people's project. I forget to tell you that the community is at the heart of the work, and they are considered to be the community researcher, and they are the owner. The community is the owner of the project, and the academic like us act like facilitator. So we have a group of facilitators to monitoring and also helping them for their work. And apart from that, we also helping them with the networking, stakeholder networking, so they can get more funding or more support, institution, various kinds of institutions for us. And also the last thing is on the policy, to try to influence the policy, the national language policy or the educational policy, because otherwise all the effort that we have been working on documentation or revitalization will not stay long. They would disappear after all the project. So this is a process that we have used for working with the community, and it is rather effective actually. Many people enjoy working on the revitalization projects through this process, and they can choose what I have told you, and they have produced a lot of work, a lot of documentation, and also the good education, mother tongue education program. The challenge, the main challenge is that the authority, even though we have been working very rather successful on the national language policy now, even though it's just a draft, but it has been accepted in many stages. But the most important challenge is that the authorities and the policymakers are still underestimate the value of the small indigenous languages. So it's difficult to find the funding and scholarship to be available, for this indigenous language revitalization program, especially the education program or the revitalization program. We're lucky that we have been funding by the Thailand Research Fund for more than 10 years working on that. But for in the future, we don't really know. So it is therefore very important to reinforce the value of the indigenous languages within the community and also outside the society, so that the tangible benefit of this group, of this work should be realized for the general society. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, great. That was really extremely interesting. Now, because of the shortness of time, I have to leave out one interesting question and go to another one that I think is also extremely crucial. And that is, we have heard from your background that you have worked not only within Thailand, but because of the language groups you have worked with, that goes of course across borders. So you have worked, for example, with this Khmer language in Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and China. So my question is, how can the stakeholders from different countries work together to preserve and vitalize languages that are sort of beyond one border, so to speak? What is there? Could you, in a very short way, describe some of your experience on this one, and what sort of what you would recommend, or what is sort of a good recipe to do this in your experience?
Your question is about the working
different countries can work together in preserving and revitalizing the languages. Like when you work with a new language, you had to work with different countries in a way. How did you do it? What is the way to work together across different countries?
Almost 20 years ago, I was there working as a linguist, trying to collect the data to see the big picture of the Khmer language inside Thailand and other countries in Southeast Asia, to find out what is really the most important characteristic of the Khmer language. And anyway, I have found that it's quite interesting. The Khmer language in every region are quite different in terms of vocabulary, grammar, and also very important is the suprasegmental phoneme, that is being tonal, non-tonal, or register. And we have found out the registral complex or tonogenesis that have been developing in Asia. And for working on the revitalization, for these languages across the country, that's not easy, because working with the minority group, indigenous group, sometimes some people or some places may not be interested in, they may think that it's not worth spending time or money on it. And for some country where the majority of this group live is quite sensitive, politically sensitive, so it's rather difficult work if we will ask them to work together. But anyway, now I think but there are ways. I think if we organize workshop, if we can organize workshop and we can ask for or invite people, or invite the various institutions of all those 4 countries to participate in. And those institutions may be linguistic department or cultural department, something like that, to participate in, or NGO or UN organization that have connection with this group to come together, and then maybe we can work out the language revitalization program, how to document it, and how to go on with the revitalization program, or working on the mother tongue education. I think in Laos, they tried to start doing that, but it was not successful many years ago. So that can be done. Another way is that is kind of formal way of doing that, is to organize a series of workshops on that. And another way is maybe a kind of informal thing, is for established digital social network for the younger generation. Maybe they can do it across the country, and then there are some good work maybe resulting from that. Yes, this is what I have thought at the moment. I have thinking about at the moment.
Okay, that is, but I still think that are sort of very good entry points. Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry that we are so short with time. So Indu, one question to you, since we have addressed on and off also young people and the importance of youth. So can I ask you, how can youth contribute to language revitalization and preservation? What are your thoughts? What is your experience? Could you talk about this?
This is for me?
Yes, Indu, that is for you. Sorry for Indu. Sorry. Thank you so much, Madame Suvilai. I'm sorry, I have to move on to Indu. We have to finish in a few minutes. So I have to still ask one question to Indu. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much. Indu, on to you.
I think to preserve our own languages, we have to remove a demonstrative effect from our mind, meaning nowadays we are copying other language, others culture, especially because we feel inferiority within ourselves, and we think the dominant language is, for example, in Nepal, Nepalese dominant, and then if we go in the broader area, we think English is great language. So we have this feeling always inside, and then I think when this feeling is inside us or inside other people, it's not our fault, because it depends on the language policy that is adopted by the government. So if I am using others' dominant language, and why I'm not using my own language, it's because our languages is not recognized, and if I speak only my language, we are not getting jobs, and I cannot use my language in the offices and also in the schools. So the government policy and the government role is really very important. And then I have seen many people, especially many youths, who are dedicated to preserve their languages through different means. They are preserving their language with music, with their singing, and using the websites and new technologies. But the problem is we are always discouraged by especially the mainstream languages and the government. For example, I can say that in my community, many youths are committed to preserve their language, but they are dismotivated. Many youths are being attacked by those who are non-indigenous. Their community FM is burnt down because they are raising indigenous people's voice. So again, here I see the role of government to praise the work of those kind of people and to invest more in encouraging those indigenous group and secure their lives as well. And also the government can award and rewards to those indigenous people. So yes, there are huge number of indigenous activists, indigenous youths who are contributing for their languages, but there is need to motivate them and aspire them for their work. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that is sort of for concluding words in a way, or thoughts. I think that is sort of quite interesting. And I think we had a sort of very interesting potpourri of many important and snapshots of very important thoughts and ideas and experiences. I have seen that people commented also in the chat groups a little bit and so on. So I think these are all what we raised from the digital aspect, from how the indigenous communities themselves need to be motivated to the interesting aspect of documentation linked with revitalization, with the role of young people, the responsibilities of governments, and sort of the need to scale up of governments to bring in different kind of enabling environment to encourage young people or sort of the indigenous communities as a whole to be committed and be interested and willing and feel also recognized and supported by entities. So I think we have very many interesting elements, and I hope that these ideas and the information that the four speakers shared, and I thank all of you very much. I think your rich experience and all the things you shared will certainly also for the Bangkok office that has to follow up with recommendations and ideas, I think will be very useful. And I hope that people in the chat group and in the next hour and tomorrow will still create more ideas and build on what we discussed now in this session. So I'm very grateful for all the four speakers, and sorry that I had to cut you short partially, but I think what you could share with us was very important and very useful. So I would like to thank the four speakers very much, and the audience to be here and listen and participate in the chat group. So Yunfan, back to you. And again, I clap my hand for the four speakers. We cannot do this in a different way. So thank you so much for all the four speakers. Thank you so much. And back to you, Yunfan.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, and many thanks again to all the panelists and like everyone who participated in the discussions in the chat box for the informative panel discussion.